Welcome to Wolf Lodge, a supernatural pack saga, where fate is messy, the sparks are wild, and the full moon brings more than fur and fangs. There's snark, steam, and a mate bond neither of them asked for, but can't escape. Buckle up, pack! From haunted hearts to ancient curses, you'll find stories here that pull you in and don't let go. If you're into tales that twist the real and the unreal, you're in the right place. T.M. Nyxen Audiobooks. To my subscribers and listeners, your ears give these stories their second life. You're the reason these stories live beyond the page. Hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. The forest slept under a quilt of moonlight, every pine needle silver-tipped, every breath of wind laced with winter's edge. At the heart of it stood Wolf Lodge, timbers thick with age, stones blackened by fire and time. The massive structure didn't just repel the cold, it demanded respect. Though the air outside was sterile and frigid, the air within the lodge was rich with the scent of long-cured pinewood, soft leather, and the crisp, clean smoke from the roaring hearth. The defining aroma of home. The house had stood for generations, a bastion of the Alpha line, but tonight it glowed with a warmth that had nothing to do with its hearth. A fierce, protective light generated solely by the family within. Inside, laughter rang, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling and chasing the dancing firelight into the shadows. 5-year-old Landon padded across the polished maple floors with his little bare feet, his curls the color of rich earth tumbling down into his eyes as he clutched a stuffed wolf nearly as big as his torso. His movements were already graceful, though clumsy, a pup testing his speed. "Daddy! Daddy! I'm faster than the enforcers now!" he declared, puffing out his chest like a miniature alpha discovering his first scent trail. Brady glanced up from where he sat on the dark leather couch, his shoulders broad and slightly slouched in the rare moment of relaxation. His presence filled the room the way storm clouds fill a sky. Heavy, powerful, and utterly commanding. Alpha in every sense, he didn't have to raise his voice to command respect. Still, when he looked at his son, the deep-seated sharpness in his grey eyes melted into something infinitely soft. "You're faster than men trained to chase rogues through the night, pup?" Brady arched a dark brow, a wry smile tugging at his lips. He reached out and snagged Landon by the waist, flipping him easily onto the cushion beside him. "That's a bold claim." Oakley, perched lightly on the armrest beside Brady, smirked and brushed a lock of dark hair from her face. She settled her hand on the back of Brady's neck, her touch instantly grounding him. "Boldness runs in the family, Alpha. Don't act so surprised." Her tone was smooth, teasing, but her eyes, deep and knowing, softened when they fell on Landon. He scrambled closer, thrusting out the heavily loved stuffed wolf. "Ask Coda. He says I'm the fastest, and he's an expert in shadows." Brady chuckled, the sound deep and resonant in his chest. "Coda talks now, does he?" Oakley laughed softly, the sound a delicate, melodic balm in the heavy lodge. "He's got the gift of imagination, a weapon far stronger than speed. Sometimes. Careful, Brady." At this rate, Landon's going to have the enforcers calling him Alpha before he can tie his boots. Brady leaned back, inhaling the familiar sense of his mate and his home. He studied his son. It was uncanny. Landon's strong jaw, the storm-grey intensity of his eyes, and even the determined tilt of his chin were all mirrors of his father. A smaller, brighter, perfectly untroubled reflection. "You will be Alpha one day," Brady said quietly, the weight of the truth threading through his voice. A promise and a burden passed down through blood. "But for now, you're a boy. And boys should be faster than sleep, faster than shadows, faster than the world can keep up with." Landon grinned, soaking in every word, every ounce of his father's pride. "Then I'll beat the moon next." "Careful," Oakley warned gently, her fingers smoothing the unruly curls on his head. "The moon doesn't like to lose." She leaned into Brady, resting her temple against his shoulder. Her touch was a silent covenant. Brady caught her hand, the one resting on his neck, and pressed his lips to her knuckles, turning them over to trace the faded scar just beneath her wrist. A reminder of a battle they had fought years ago, side by side. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Years of shared purpose, nights spent as mates and leaders, and a love that had grown stronger and deeper with every challenge they faced. Oakley shifted, leaning her weight fully against him, so that her head rested exactly over the steady, slow thump of his heart. Her safe harbor, the moment of perfect domesticity, was interrupted by the distant, familiar howl of their pack wolves. It wasn't a warning cool dot, it was a chorus of belonging, a reminder that their pack was strong and united, their territory secured. Brady closed his eyes, listening. The sound sank into his bones, filling the room with something greater than warmth, purpose, and the crushing responsibility that accompanied it. Oakley broke the silence. Her voice dropping to a low, serious tone meant only for him. The neutral gathering is in 3 days. The emissaries are already preparing the border grounds. Brady's jaw tightened, the lines of stress instantly deepening around his mouth. I haven't forgotten. He released her hand, the sudden loss of contact, an abrupt shock between them. Landon, oblivious to the swift shift in the adult atmosphere, had already set his stuffed coda on the floor and was racing in circles, chanting about being faster than the shadows and the moon. Oakley tilted her head, watching the rigid posture return to her mate's spine. 7 alphas under one roof, Brady. You know it won't all be peaceful. The Iron Fang pack has been restless for 3 rotations, and the Red Hollow Alpha is starving for control. It never is, Brady said, his voice hardening, pulling him fully out of the role of father and into that of alpha. The leader must stand firm, but Wolf Lodge will stand. It always has. He glanced at his son, who stumbled, laughed, and picked himself back up without hesitation, his face alight with joy. And no one will ever touch what's mine. Not now, and not 3 days from now. The flames in the hearth snapped violently, throwing sparks into the air, brilliant and brief. The warmth in the lodge was genuine, a tangible sense of security. But beneath the polished floorboards, the cold of the brewing conflict was already crawling closer, waiting for the moon to set. The neutral ground stretched wide under an endless sweep of sky. Stone terraces circled a fire pit large enough to roast a bear, and ancient pines, thick with the scent of pitch and damp earth, formed the outer wall of the gathering place. It wasn't home to any pack dot, it was older than borders, a place where even alphas bowed to the iron laws of tradition. The air itself felt heavy, a thick, smothering blanket woven from the competing scents of 7 packs. Musk, pine resin, expensive leather, and the constant, savory plume of roasting meat sizzling over the central fire. This complex web of smells was overlaid by the sharp, metallic tang of repressed adrenaline. Sounds were equally overwhelming. The low, guttural murmur of alphas' voices trying to maintain civility, the constant, rhythmic clinking of silver goblets against rough stone, and the soft, nervous shuffle of enforcers maintaining rigid formation. Brady strode in first, Oakley at his side, her calm presence a quiet anchor against his raw power. Landon was perched proudly on his father's shoulders, a small cub surveying his kingdom with bright, curious eyes. Behind them, Wolf Lodge's enforcers fanned out, silent and watchful, their movements precise. Other packs were already assembled. Greetings were stiff, respectful, but weighted with a kind of tension that only came when 7 alphas pretended to be equals. Every handshake lasted a fraction too long. Every gaze held a calculated measure of dominance. Alpha Marcus of Iron Fang Pack, broad as an oak trunk, clasped Brady's forearm with a grunt that was half respect, half challenge. His Luna, delicate Elise, stood behind him, eyes sharp as knives, assessing Oakley's attire and posture. Then came Elias of River Bend. Lean and calculating, smelling faintly of river moss and new rain, his grown son hovering nearby like a silent shadow. Alpha Lucian of Red Hollow, tall and lean, wore the polished smile of a man who thrived on politics, every word buttered and slick. Introductions rolled, names and nods, every word measured and every gesture scrutinized. Enforcers exchanged wary glances, children trailed after their parents with varying degrees of discipline, and the humid air crackled with restrained dominance. Oakley carried herself like a queen, her inner certainty smoothing the edges of Brady's storm. She exchanged greetings with the Lunas, her words gracious but never submissive. Even among predators, she commanded respect without having to raise her voice. Then the air didn't just shift, it was violently displaced. The Stone Creek pack approached, announced by a sudden clawing wave of chemical-sweet perfume that instantly overpowered the natural smells of smoke and pine. Alpha Raymond walked tall, but there was weariness in his eyes, the kind that came from years of bending when he should have stood firm. He wore a strained, visibly forced smile that didn't reach the deep lines of stress etched around his mouth, already betraying his deep embarrassment. His Luna kept her gaze down, face pale and tight. And striding a decisive step ahead, dressed in silks that glittered an offensive shade of emerald even in daylight, came Ash. She was a discordant note in the ancient stone circle. Her hair spilled in golden waves, too carefully arranged and unnatural, held in place by obvious artifice. Her lips were painted a ferocious crimson that clashed violently with the quiet, wild simplicity of the gathering. Her perfume, a sickly sweet overlay of gardenia and manufactured musk, was so powerful, it made several of the alphas wrinkle their noses instinctively. She moved as though the ground itself owed her reverence, her chin lifted to an arrogant height, her gaze sweeping over the crowd like she was choosing servants from a lineup. Whispers passed through the ranks, quickly smothered but potent. More than one Luna subtly rolled her eyes at the excess of finery. Marcus's broad face darkened, and more than one enforcer muttered something under his breath about common sense and etiquette. Ash ignored it all, basking in the imagined spotlight, drawing deep breaths of her own overly manufactured scent. "Father," she announced, her voice pitched aggressively high, intended to carry across the terraces, turning the entire formal gathering into her personal stage. "You didn't tell me the men here would be so—" Her eyes darted slowly, lingering dismissively on the scarred jaws, battle-worn shoulders, and rugged clothing of the assembled wolves. Disappointing. Raymond's jaw tightened, his forced smile instantly dissolving into a hard line of shame. He leaned in, murmuring, "Ash, enough." Diplomacy. A sharp warning. She only smiled sweetly, batting her unnaturally long lashes, utterly unrepentant. "But they are all so hairy and dull," she sniffed disdainfully. Brady watched her with a predator's stillness, his body language communicating only cold assessment. He'd seen this kind before. Spoiled, selfish, accustomed to having her vanity stroked, mistaking manufactured beauty for genuine power. Oakley's hand brushed his wrist, a quiet tether reminding him diplomacy came first, her silent message clearer than a shouted reprimand. "Ignore her. She's bait." Then Ash's gaze landed on him. For a heartbeat, her practiced smirk faltered. Brady stood tall, immensely broad-shouldered, radiating contained power. His son balanced easily on his shoulders. The effortless strength of the Wolf Lodge Alpha filled the space without theatricality, his eyes storm-grey and utterly unflinching. Ash's lips parted slightly, like prey catching sight of a hunter, only she didn't possess enough sense to fear him. Instead, she smiled. A slow, self-satisfied, and wholly possessive curve of the lips, the kind of smile that promised immediate and unrelenting trouble. "Not all disappointing," she murmured, her voice dropping just low enough to sound intimate, yet loud enough for those nearest Dot, including Oakley, to hear perfectly. The predatory interest was unmistakable. Oakley's eyes narrowed instantly, a silent but palpable threat. Landon, perched on Brady's shoulders, frowned hard at Ash. "Daddy, why's that lady staring at you? I don't like her." A jarring, involuntary ripple of laughter broke out among the gathered alphas, the tension momentarily snapping. Ash's cheeks flushed a furious hot pink, not with shame but with poisonous irritation. She tilted her chin higher, glaring at the innocent boy as if he were a poisonous insect. Raymond's shoulders slumped, the weight of his daughter's overweening arrogance dragging him down into public humiliation. He muttered something fierce to her under his breath, leaning down until his lips nearly touched her ear. But Ash waved him off with a flick of her glittering hand, as though even her father was beneath her notice. The central fire pit cracked, a loud, sharp explosion of sound, sparks leaping skyward as though the ground itself had grown impatient. The formal gathering had finally begun, but the storm had only just walked into the center of the circle. The long table stretched the length of the neutral lodge hall, its dark mahogany surface reflecting the flickering candlelight. It was laden with the offerings of the forest: roasted venison, fresh, crusty bread, and heavy bowls of ruby-red berries. The setting was one of rigid order. Alphas and Lunas took their seats according to old custom. Pairs side by side, enforcers lining the walls like silent statues, and heirs close enough to watch and learn the etiquette of power. Brady sat at the head, a picture of contained power, his silence heavier than the collective chatter of the surrounding packs. Oakley sat beside him, her posture relaxed yet alert, a quiet counterpoint to his intensity. Landon, nestled between them, provided the only genuinely bright sound, his laughter, soft and unrestrained, softening the aggressive edges of the tense gathering. Ash slid into the seat directly across from Brady, the movement too graceful and deliberate to be accidental. She ignored her father, Raymond, who sent her a silent, furious frown from 2 seats down. "Alpha Brady," she purred, the sound drawn out as if she were tasting the syllables. Her voice had a theatrical, high-quality tone that was already beginning to grate on the strained nerves of the room. "I've heard so much about you. Wolf Lodge's great alpha, stronger, fiercer, braver than any man here." Her words were an intrusion, forcing the heads of other seated couples to turn. She leaned forward, her body language aggressively exposed, her neckline dipping deliberately low. Her eyes, shining with practiced seduction, held him captive. "And I must say, the rumors don't do you justice." Brady's fork, lifting a piece of carved meat, paused mid-air. His storm-grey eyes lifted slowly, flat, and utterly unimpressed by the performance. "Eat your meal," he said, the words falling out like pebbles dropped into a well. Short, heavy, and final. The bluntness of the dismissal drew several muffled chuckles from older alphas down the table, who quickly concealed their amusement in their wine goblets. Oakley's lips curved slightly, a momentary spark of triumph, though her gaze remained sharp as glass, fixed on Ash's rapidly blooming colour. Ash recovered, flipping her long blonde hair back with a dramatic toss, a move designed to distract from the sting. Her laughter sliced into the quiet discussion of the neighbouring pack's harvest yields, bright and jarringly artificial. "So direct," she purred, brushing her fingers across the gilded rim of her goblet, feigning nonchalance. "I like that. Tell me, Alpha, do you always speak so rough? Or is this just the special treatment reserved for me?" Oakley's chair scraped slightly on the stone floor as she shifted, leaning forward just enough to center her attention. Her voice was calm, low, yet perfectly projected. "It's not roughness," that was a warning. The tone was ice cold, the very air around her chilling, and it carried enough weight to make even the nearby enforcers stiffen their spines. Ash blinked, genuinely surprised by the quiet steel in Oakley's response, which belied her soft features. Then she smirked, tilting her head in a dismissive challenge. Ash tilted her head, her smile all sugar and venom. "Luna Oakley, isn't it? You must be very bold to keep speaking for your husband." Oakley didn't so much as blink. Her smile remained, but it was brittle as ice, her gaze narrowing to a blade. "I don't speak for him. I speak beside him. That's the difference between a Luna and a child. Perhaps you should focus on your father's conversation before you make yourself truly unwelcome. Brady finally set his fork down, the clatter on the porcelain plate echoing in the now silent room. His gaze locked onto Ash, unblinking, his authority radiating and pressing against her skin. You'll find I don't need anyone to speak for me, and I'll tell you once, keep your eyes where they belong, and your thoughts on the dinner. His voice rolled like low thunder, a pure alpha growl that instantly stilled the slightest clatter of cutlery and the movement of the servers. Ash's breath hitched, the sheer, unadulterated dominance washing over her, pushing her back into her chair. For a heart-stopping second, she was a Luna in waiting, facing a true predator. But instead of submitting, she twisted the sensation. The fear. The rush of adrenaline dot into something else entirely. A slow, sly smile crept onto her lips, arrogant and defiant. Hard to get, then? Across the table, Landon scowled deeply, crumbs dusting his cheeks from the abandoned bread roll he held. He took his cue from his father's obvious displeasure. "Daddy doesn't like you," he announced loudly, stabbing his finger aggressively toward Ash's plate. "Go away!" Uncontrollable laughter rippled around the table, barely stifled. The sound was a humiliating wave that washed over Ash. She opened her mouth to snap an angry retort at the boy, but Brady cut her off instantly with a low, potent snarl that silenced the entire room again. "This is dinner conversation for adults," Brady stated, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Mind your business, child. Know your place." The words were final and sharp as claws, the complete and utter rejection of her presence. Raymond cleared his throat nervously, his voice cracking with embarrassment. "Ash, that is enough. Now!" But his daughter only leaned back, recovering with a terrifying speed. Her lips curled into a smug, challenging defiance. Beneath the sting of humiliation and the force of the public rejection, her eyes still clung to Brady, glittering not with anger, but with overwhelming interest. The certainty of a spoiled child who believed no one could truly deny her what she wanted. To her, this wasn't rejection. It was the highest form of resistance, a guarantee that he was worth the chase. He was teasing her, she decided, and she loved a man who knew how to play hard. The neutral grounds were alive with movement the next morning, a dynamic tapestry woven from the necessity of truce and the inherent rivalry of the alphas present. Wolves sparred in the training ring, the rhythmic thud of bodies hitting the dirt floor a constant primal backdrop. Around the terraces, alphas exchanged updates on border patrols and trade routes, their voices low and authoritative. Children chased one another across the expanse, their sharp, clear laughter echoing against the towering pines, blissfully ignorant of the undercurrents of political tension. Brady moved among it all like a storm contained within a vessel of iron restraint. He was the gravity in the room. Wherever he paused, conversations hushed, and heads dipped in instinctive respect. His presence was formidable, and it was never solitary. His enforcers, Garrick and Reese, two men built like granite walls, shadowed him. Their movements subtle, but proprietary. And always, within comfortable conversation distance, was Oakley, observing everything. Brady's posture was relaxed, yet every muscle was primed, and wherever he went, Ash followed. She trailed him with the deliberate, predatory grace of a feline, her expensive, pale gold gown swirling subtly as she wove through the throng. Her presence was calculated noise. Her laughter, loud, manufactured, and pitched just high enough, cut through serious conversations as she sought proximity. Brady was engaged in a tense exchange with Alpha Kieran concerning disputed hunting territory when Ash struck. She approached his left flank, ostensibly seeking a clear view of the territorial map spread on a nearby low table. "Oh, excuse me, Alpha Brady," she murmured, her voice laced with false lightness. She didn't look at the map at all. Instead, her hand darted out, her fingers pressing briefly, deliberately, against the crisp fabric covering Brady's forearm. A subtle, intimate claim. Brady went utterly still. The conversation paused instantly, Kieran's eyes flicking from Ash to the alpha's face. Before Brady could react, Garrick, who had been standing a foot away, took a seamless step forward and wide. He didn't touch Ash, but the sheer bulk of his body, the heavy leather of his armor, and the sudden, scentless wall he created, forced her backward. "Pardon me, miss," Garrick rumbled, his voice a low vibration that held no room for argument. "The alpha needs focus for this discussion." Ash's smile remained plastered on, but her eyes flashed with momentary venom. "He needs focus? He needs me," she thought, the delusion instantly reinforcing her attempt. "A dominant male tests his potential, Luna. He likes that I am bold enough to demand his attention even when he is busy. He is gauging my strength." Minutes later, she tried a bolder tactic at the training ring. Brady was giving specific instructions to a struggling warrior. Ash attempted to wedge herself into the small, intimate circle formed by Brady and the warrior's lieutenant. "Excuse me, miss." Rhys intercepted her instantly, his hand resting lightly, but warningly, on the heavy leather belt at his hip. "This area's restricted, for safety." Ash tossed her elaborate golden braid, sniffing dismissively. "Restricted for everyone but me, surely. I wish to observe the form. Perhaps I should offer my opinion." Rhys didn't move. He was monumental, his expression entirely neutral, yet his eyes promised swift, non-negotiable compliance. Brady, still watching his warrior execute the complex defensive maneuver, didn't so much as turn his head. His voice, however, sliced through the air, low and cold. He said, "Move, Ash. Do not test my patience." Ash's painted lips parted in a silent gasp. To be dismissed so publicly, so coldly, felt like a physical blow. She retreated 2 full steps, her face briefly twisting into a mask of thwarted fury, before she managed to smooth it back into a coy, wounded expression. Across the terrace, Oakley observed the entire exchange. A slow, serpentine satisfaction curled the edges of her mouth as she watched Ash fail to breach the protective circle. Ash was a predictable annoyance, easy to manage because she could not fathom true disinterest. Later, as the sun began to dip and the delegation moved toward the feast hall, Ash saw her final opportunity for high visibility. She intercepted Brady at the grand entrance archway, maneuvering so that the arch itself trapped him momentarily. Her hand darted out to catch his sleeve. A possessive, lingering contact, intended for all who watched. Brady's eyes dropped to the place where her fingers rested on the linen of his sleeve, and his gaze was utterly devoid of human emotion, inspecting the contact as though it were a piece of unexpected, contaminating filth. "You shouldn't touch me," he warned, his voice dangerously level. She laughed lightly, a nervous, forced sound. "So dangerous. You'll scare me off." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying, whispering just loud enough for the flanking enforcers, and for Oakley, who had paused not far away in quiet conversation with another Luna, and to hear. "Maybe that's what truly excites me, Alpha. The danger." Brady's expression hardened into ice. He jerked his arm free with such force that Ash stumbled back a half step. He stepped past her without a word, Garrick and Rhys closing ranks immediately. As Rhys followed, his broad shoulder clipped Ash's with a deliberate check. To the onlookers, it looked like an innocent misstep in the crush of bodies. To Ash, it was a calculated warning, the air knocked from her lungs as she sprawled briefly against a stone pillar. Her cheeks burned crimson, composure slipping through her fingers. From across the hall, Oakley lifted her glass of wine, her expression cool, unreadable. The slight tilt of her head was enough. Acknowledgement of Ash's humiliation, silent and sharp. When Ash finally stormed over, trembling with frustrated rage, Oakley tilted her head, her dark eyes glittering with cruel amusement. Careful, Oakley said sweetly, lifting her glass with deliberate calm. You're circling an alpha, not a bone. Don't be surprised when the teeth come out, or when the guards mistake you for a threat that needs removing. Ash's nails dug crescent moons into her palms. Fury boiled in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She couldn't afford to shriek like a child. Not here, not with so many eyes watching. So she stalked away, silent, her head high. Inside, though, she twisted every word into a challenge, every humiliation into fuel. In her mind, Oakley wasn't warning her off. She was admitting she was threatened. That night, as the Central Council fires burned low and the Alphas gathered for last-minute strategic discussions, Ash made one final, desperate attempt to solidify her presumed position. She saw a space on the long semicircular bench beside Brady and slipped into it, pressing herself close, her hip deliberately grazing his leg as though she belonged there, naturally, inextricably. Before she could even manage a proprietary phrase, however, Oakley slid effortlessly into the opposite seat, boxing Ash in. Oakley's gaze was steady, dark, and utterly devoid of kindness. I think you've mistaken your place again, Ash, Oakley stated calmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had earned her seat. This conversation is for specific representatives. Ash opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. Brady didn't look at Ash. He didn't speak. Instead, his hand reached across the rough-hewn table, finding Oakley's hand. His large, scarred thumb began to stroke the delicate bones of her knuckles. A simple, proprietary gesture that shielded Oakley and dismissed the woman beside him entirely. The act was louder and more devastating than any shouted rejection. She was his comfort. She was his focus. Ash swallowed her rising hysteria. Her internal monologue, however, immediately supplied the necessary narrative. He is showing me his devotion. He tests me by remaining aloof, gauging how committed I am to overcoming the obstacle of his current consort, to proving I am the superior choice. He needs a Luna who can weather storms, who will not be frightened off by a little difficulty. She maintained her fixed, slight smile, her fury transforming into cold, resolute ambition. To her, every dismissal was simply another step in the intricate, high-stakes game of status and power. Ash had never learned how to lose, and she convinced herself, watching Brady's thumb measure Oakley's knuckles, that this was merely the beginning of her victory. Golden sunlight, thick with dust motes dancing, streamed through the towering windows of the main lodge, painting long, shifting squares across the polished wooden floor. At the heart of one of these sun-drenched patches sat Landon, cross-legged on a thick, dark fur rug. His small hands carefully orchestrated a sprawling battle scene with his meticulously arranged wolf figurines, a grand, epic narrative only he could truly decipher. Beside him, propped up like a silent general, was Coda, his beloved, well-worn plush Arctic wolf. Landon's small voice, clear and earnest, rose and fell as he issued commands to his miniature army, his deep grey eyes, so strikingly like his father's, alight with a vivid, mischievous imagination. A short distance away, Brady quietly conversed with Marcus, the formidable alpha of the Iron Fang Pack, while Oakley stood gracefully by his side, her calm demeanour, a perfect counterpoint to Brady's raw, powerful presence. The hall hummed with the low murmur of many voices, the air thick with the scents of various packs, a blend of pine, earth, and something primal. This gathering was ostensibly a celebration of strengthened ties, a diplomatic dance, yet beneath the polite smiles and raised toasts, Brady could feel the undercurrents of posturing, veiled challenges, and carefully crafted half-truths. Still, with Oakley's sharp diplomatic insights tempering his own blunt, straightforward nature, the Alpha of Wolf Lodge held court with an undeniable, effortless authority. It was then that Ash made her entrance. She didn't walk so much as drift into the grand hall, her movements fluid and almost ethereal, like tendrils of smoke caught on a breeze. Her gown, a deep, jewel-toned sapphire, seemed to ripple around her, drawing every eye. She made a deliberate show of gliding past the assembled alphas and their lunars, acknowledging none of the wary, assessing glances that followed her. Her predatory gaze, sharp and calculating, was initially fixed on Brady, a clear, unspoken challenge in its depths. But as she drew closer, her eyes snagged on the small figure engrossed in play on the fur rug. The carefully constructed, alluring smile she wore for the powerful alpha twisted, briefly, into something else. A fleeting flicker of disdain, perhaps, or a predatory gleam of opportunity, before smoothing back into a saccharine sweetness. "Well, aren't you precious?" she cooed, the sound cloying and artificial. Without invitation, she lowered herself to a crouch beside Landon, her expensive silks rustling. Her crimson-painted lips stretched into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her slender, jeweled fingers, tipped with perfectly manicured nails, reached out, not quite touching Landon, but hovering over his assembled wolf figurines. "What a handsome little copy of your father!" she purred, her gaze darting from the child to the imposing alpha across the room, as if to gauge his reaction. Landon froze, his small body stiffening instantly. His game, his carefully constructed world, threatened. Without a moment's hesitation, his tiny hand shot out, not only snatching the wolf figurine she was about to touch, but also clutching his plush Coda wolf tighter to his chest, as if it, too, needed protection from her encroaching presence. His deep grey eyes, usually so full of childlike wonder, narrowed now with a fierce, unwavering conviction, a nascent intensity that bespoke the born alpha he was destined to be. "Go away," he enunciated, each syllable flat, unyielding, and utterly devoid of fear or childish politeness. He didn't shout, he simply stated a truth he felt with every fibre of his being. The blunt, undeniable command cut through the polite hum of the hall, clear as a bell. Heads snapped around, conversations died. An immediate ripple of astonished, then amused chuckles began to spread through the gathered packs. A collective acknowledgement of the child's bold honesty. Ash blinked, her perfectly composed mask cracking for a brief, stunned moment. Her mouth opened, a sound like glass shards scraping together emerging. A brittle, high-pitched laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Her heavily made-up eyes, in fact, narrowed almost imperceptibly, a glint of something sharp and cold replacing the feigned warmth. "My, what a rude little pup," she sneered, her voice now edged with a false sweetness. "Didn't your mother teach you manners?" Oakley, who had been watching with a calm, predatory stillness, allowed her own smile to sharpen, losing its diplomatic softness. "He has manners," she interjected smoothly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard over Ash's forced cheerfulness. "He also has incredibly keen instincts, and when Landon tells someone to go away, I have learned to listen very carefully." The subtle implication hung in the air. "You should too." Brady, a force of nature barely contained, rose from his seat. His movement was slow, deliberate, each sinewy muscle flexing beneath his clothes, a clear warning. His towering presence seemed to blot out every other sound, every other conversation, drawing all focus to him. He moved silently, like a shadow of impending storm, coming to stand directly behind his small son, a formidable looming wall of raw alpha authority. His gaze, usually warm when it met his family's, now pinned Ash, cold and unyielding as granite, promising nothing but absolute winter. "My son comes before everything," Brady stated, his voice a low, dangerous growl that seemed to vibrate directly into the bones of every wolf in the room. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth were visible, a clear indicator of the barely suppressed rage. "You lay a hand on him," he continued, his tone dropping even further, a chilling whisper that promised devastation. "You so much as breathe wrong in his direction, and I won't stop at words." The air itself, thick with tension, suddenly felt charged with an almost palpable danger. crackling around Brady like static electricity, promising an imminent, violent storm should his boundary be crossed. The entire room fell into a deathly, absolute silence. Not a whisper, not a rustle of cloth. Even Raymond, Ash's father, who'd been trying to appear nonchalant, stiffened visibly, a flush of shame and impotent rage painting his face. He averted his gaze, offering no defense, no support for his daughter, powerless in the face of Brady's wrath. Ash's perfectly painted lips trembled almost imperceptibly. For a fleeting heartbeat, an expression of genuine fear, or perhaps startled vulnerability, flickered across her features, making it seem as though she might finally back down. But then, almost instantly, the mask slammed back into place. The brittle smirk returned, harder now, more determined, a defiant challenge. She tilted her head slightly, a subtle gesture that only made her eyes glint with an even sharper, more cunning light. "So protective," she murmured, her voice a silken thread, laced with an unnerving undertone that belied the apparent flattery. "It's quite admirable, Brady." Her words were deliberately provocative, designed to needle, to test the limits of his monumental anger. With an air of supreme disdain, she rose from her crouch, smoothing the rich fabric of her skirts with an almost languid grace. She turned, then, and walked away from the scene, her posture meticulously regal, her back ramrod straight. It was a performance, a deliberate display of unruffled elegance, as if she hadn't just been thoroughly humiliated and verbally eviscerated by a 5-year-old and an enraged alpha in front of half the assembled council of packs. Landon, still clutching Coda, looked up at his father, his grey eyes clear and guileless. "She's mean," he announced, his voice matter-of-fact, utterly devoid of malice or fear, simply stating an observable truth. Brady's expression softened instantly, the tempest in his eyes replaced by a profound pride. He ruffled his son's soft hair, a gentle, reassuring gesture. "That, son," he murmured, a low rumble of affection in his chest, "is the smartest thing I've heard all day." The tension that had gripped the room finally broke, replaced by a wave of relieved, appreciative laughter that echoed through the hall. In that singular moment, Landon wasn't just a child playing with toys. He was clearly the future alpha of Wolf Lodge, already possessing an unwavering honesty and an innate perception that allowed him to see straight through the carefully constructed masks of deception that even most adults struggled to penetrate. Ash didn't once glance back, her regal facade firmly in place, as she exited the hall. But behind her, hidden from view, her slender fingers clenched white-knuckled around the exquisite fabric of her gown, the silk groaning under the pressure. Her breath came in shallow, controlled gasps, her mind already racing. If Brady's infuriating, honest son was to be yet another obstacle in her path, then so be it. A glint of cold, ruthless determination shone in her eyes. She would not be deterred. She would simply find a way around him. Or through him. The feast hall blazed with the reckless heat of pine logs, shadows dancing like hungry spirits across the intricately carved beams overhead. The long table groaned beneath platters of roasted venison, sharp cider, and bowls overflowing with autumn fruits. The air was thick with the scent of spices, and the musky underlying perfume of so many powerful wolves gathered in close quarters. The low conversation and clinking of silverware created a deceptive drumbeat of normalcy, momentarily masking the ever-present weight of dominance as 7 alphas and their respective packs broke bread together. Brady and Oakley entered side by side, Landon weaving between them, already reaching toward the steaming trays with the boys' impatience. The enforcers followed, moving as a practiced wall of presence that demanded space open wherever they passed. Their places at the center of the table were marked by tradition. Alpha and Luna sat together, their child tucked close, a bold display of strength and unity. Tonight, that display served as an undeniable boundary. Ash was waiting to cross that mark in the sand, as Brady pulled out Oakley's chair. A gesture of intimate ownership and respect, Ash struck. She slid into the seat with the arrogance of a queen seizing a throne, silks whispering, perfume cloying, her smile a poisonous lure. "Alpha Brady," she purred, the sound sticky sweet. "Surely you wouldn't mind a little company?" The hall went silent, not hushed dead. Even spoons paused halfway to mouths, every eye trained on the insult unfolding. Brady didn't sit. He loomed. The storm grey of his eyes fixed on Ash, not with anger alone, but with a weight that crushed. Then, without a word, his hand closed around the back of the heavy chair. He wrenched it up and shoved. The legs screeched against the stone floor, like claws raking slate. The sound sharp enough to make children clap hands to their ears. Ash gave a startled cry as the entire chair jolted backward, her body pitched, silks tangling around her legs. The force didn't stop with a drag. It drove her and the chair sliding a full span down the hall, until she collided with the table's edge in an inelegant sprawl. The silence that followed wasn't merely shock, it was judgment. Brady dragged another empty chair into place with deliberate calm, then offered his Luna his hand. As Oakley settled gracefully at his side, a low growl rumbled from his chest, directed at Ash, where she sat sprawled down the hall. The sound was absolute, but it carried weight, primal and unyielding, leaving no doubt that her intrusion was finished. When he returned to his place and finally settled beside Oakley, the shift in his presence was palpable. His voice, when it came, wasn't raised, but it carried the chilling, deep resonance of pure command, carrying to every corner of the hall. Disrespectful. The single word hit like a hard, cold blow. Alphas stiffened, sensing the territorial violation, their expressions grim. Lunas exchanged quick, meaningful glances, and some of the younger enforcers couldn't quite stifle their relieved smirks behind their goblets. Ash sat frozen, her perfect composure evaporated. The flush of her humiliation was a vivid, burning crimson, staining her cheeks and throat for all to witness. She had been publicly dismantled. Brady placed his hand on Oakley's, a casual, easy claim of unity that was sharper than any declaration. Then his gaze shifted, locking onto Raymond with a sharpness that cut through the hall. "Pull your daughter into line," he said, the words flat and final, laced with the subtle crack of an alpha's growl. The sound vibrated through the chests of those nearest, a primal warning wrapped in restraint. Every wolf present understood it. Brady was holding back for the sake of diplomacy, because if this had been anywhere else, Ash would have already been dealt with. Her behavior reflects badly on you, on your Luna, and on your pack. If she cannot learn respect, then you've already failed her as alpha and as father. The words cut like honed blades, targeting Raymond's most foundational responsibilities. Raymond flinched, the shame not just creeping but flaring up his neck in a hot, undeniable rush. He could feel every eye on him, the silent judgment settling on his shoulders like heavy iron. The silence of the room became its own weapon, amplifying his failure tenfold. Other alphas exchanged cold, knowing looks. A silent consensus that Raymond's pack discipline was clearly lacking. Raymond opened his mouth to offer some defense, but Brady wasn't finished. "She embarrasses herself. She embarrasses you. And if she embarrasses me or mine again, it will not end with words." The growl that followed rumbled through the hall, deep and primal, the kind that made even seasoned wolves lower their gaze in instinctive respect. For a moment, the heavy silence reigned again. Then Oakley, calm as a lake at dawn, lifted her goblet and sipped, as though nothing more serious than a slight rearrangement of furniture had occurred. Her quiet composure only sharpened the sting of the public execution. Ash's eyes glistened, but not with tears of sorrow. They were bright with incandescent rage. She leaned back in her displaced, rejected chair, her chin lifted, the trembling curve of her lips turning her former false smile into something twisted and dangerous. "If you think you can scare me off," she whispered to the empty air beside her, her voice brittle but laced with iron. "You don't know me at all." She had been humiliated before all the packs. Any other woman would have withered under the shame and retreated. Ash, however, inhaled the scorn, turning the spectacle of her failure into fuel. What Brady thought was an ending, she decided was only the beginning. The study was not merely a room within Wolf Lodge. It was its very heart, a hallowed sanctuary steeped in the essence of generations. Heavy, dark oak shelves loomed like ancient sentinels, laden not just with books but with the very chronicles of the pack. Leather-bound ledgers detailing births and deaths, maps charting ancestral territories, and brittle scrolls bearing the weight of treaties signed in blood and ink. The air itself seemed to hum with history, thick with the scent of aged paper, polished wood, and the faint, enduring musk of wolf. At its absolute center, dominating the space, stood the great desk, a magnificent slab of wood carved from a single ancient fallen tree, its surface gleaming with the deep, burnished patina of time and countless hands. This was where alphas had sat for centuries, their formidable presence settling behind it to pen decrees that shaped destinies, to affix their seals to treaties that forged alliances, and to strategize wars that defined their existence. It was, unequivocally, not a place for games, which made Ash's blatant, audacious intrusion all the more infuriating, a sacrilege against the very spirit of the lodge. She lounged across the alpha's desk as though it were her personal chaise lounge, her pose a deliberate affront. One leg, encased in the finest shimmering silk that caught the ambient light, was bent alluringly, while the other dangled carelessly off the side, a perfectly manicured foot toying with the antique oriental rug beneath. Her silks, a cascade of rose and gold, slid low, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone, a calculated display of vulnerability and allure. Her golden hair, a riot of carefully constructed curls, fanned around her shoulders like a halo, framing a face currently alight with self-satisfaction. She toyed idly, almost disrespectfully, with one of Brady's prized quills, a relic rumoured to have been used by his great-grandfather, her slender fingers tracing its feathered tip. Her lips, painted a seductive crimson, were curved in a slow, sultry smile, a silent taunt anticipating the alpha's arrival. And permeating the sacred air, heavy and cloying, was the thick, floral perfume she favoured, a scent that now seemed to choke the study, contaminating its venerable silence with its cloying sweetness. The heavy oak door, usually silent in its operation, creaked open with a groan that echoed the gravitas of the room. Brady entered, not just walking, but arriving. His steps were heavy, measured, each one grounding him deeper into the earth, and his presence, a palpable wave of contained power, filled the study entirely, preceding the sound of his voice, preceding even the full sight of him. The ancient oak shelves and stone walls around him seemed to lean closer, almost imperceptibly, as if bracing themselves, sensing the tempest brewing within their alpha. The very air grew taut, crackling with an unspoken tension. Ash, blissfully unaware of the true depth of his mood, or perhaps defiantly choosing to ignore it, purred, her voice a low, throaty rumble designed to tantalize. "I was waiting for you, Alpha." The words hung in the air like a plume of noxious smoke, an invitation, a challenge, wrapped in silky deceit. For one terrible, exhilarating heartbeat, Ash allowed herself the full flush of her delusion. She imagined Brady would stride to her, his hard gaze finally breaking, sweeping her off the desk with a guttural growl of possession, claiming her with the fierce, forbidden passion she was utterly convinced he secretly longed to unleash. Her chest tightened, a delicious tremor of anticipation running through her veins, her heart thrumming with the certainty of her perceived triumph. Instead, Brady froze. His movement, so purposeful just a moment before, ceased abruptly. His eyes, usually pools of clear crystal grey, narrowed into storm clouds, a tempest gathering in their depths. His broad shoulders, typically relaxed with the innate confidence of command, tensed, growing rigid, like a wild beast coiling. His jaw hardened into an unyielding line of iron, a stark indicator of the immense struggle for control raging within him. Then, the growl came. It wasn't just a sound, it was a force, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the air, ripping through Ash's fantasy. Get the fuck out! The words were raw, primal, saturated with an alpha command that resonated deep within the bones, vibrating through the thick floorboards and up into Ash's very core, shaking her to her senses. Ash blinked, stunned, her perfectly constructed facade faltering. Brady, I. Before she could utter another manipulative syllable, the door opened wider. Two hulking figures, Brady's personal enforcers, stepped into the room, silent and menacing. They were broad shadows, solid walls of muscle and threat, flanking their alpha-like extensions of his own formidable will. Their eyes, sharp and unwavering, flicked from Brady's barely contained rage to the woman still sprawled indecently across the sacred desk. Their mouths tightened into hard, humorless lines, a silent but potent judgment. Brady didn't need to move closer. His physical proximity was irrelevant. His presence was enough. His voice, though still low, was now knife-sharp, each word a honed edge. This desk has been the seat of alphas of Wolf Lodge for generations. It is where their wisdom was forged, their power wielded. You stain it with your frivolous presence. You shame your father with your childish games, and your disrespect for everything this pack stands for. Now get out before I forget your bloodline and throw you to the wolves outside, where you belong among the carrion eaters. Ash's breath came fast, ragged and shallow, her face flushing scarlet as a potent mix of anger and disbelief warred within her. Yet, even in the face of such raw, unadulterated fury, she clung stubbornly to her delusion. She slid off the desk slowly, deliberately, a theatrical performance, as though she were the one granting mercy, bestowing a moment's reprieve upon him. Her movements were fluid, reclaiming her composure with a practiced ease, even as her heart pounded like a trapped bird. Her chin tilted high, a defiant, almost mocking gesture, and her lips curled into a slow, infuriating smirk. You don't have to pretend, Alpha. I see the fire beneath your anger. You can try to hide it, but I know what you truly feel. One day you'll stop fighting it, and then you'll come to me. The silence fractured under the scrape of claws unsheathing at Brady's sides, his fists tightening until his knuckles blanched. He stepped forward, looming over her, his shadow long across the hall. His voice carried, deep and cutting, each word a blade designed to wound. You are wrong. His tone was merciless, steady as steel. I don't want you. I don't desire you. You are not fire, you are rot. You will never make a Luna, not for me, not for any alpha with sense in his head. You are a spoiled child playing at womanhood, and every time you open your mouth, you prove it further. His enforcers gave a low growl. Brady's gaze never left hers, cold and brutal. Hear me clearly, Ash. The only thing I feel when you're near me is disgust. And if you mistake my patience for interest again, you will regret it. The weight of his words landed like an executioner's axe, leaving no space for Ash's delusions to breathe. His enforcers, sensing the escalation, stepped forward in unison, their combined presence an impenetrable wall of implicit threat, a silent promise of rapid, brutal action should she push him further. Out now, Brady repeated, the single word cracking like a whip, lashing through the air, stripping away any last vestige of Ash's bravado. Each letter was a distinct, chilling command. Ash flinched, a subtle tremor running through her, the spell finally broken by the undeniable force of his will. With a dramatic, sweeping swish of silk, she turned and swept past them, her exit a final, theatrical flourish of indignation. The cloying scent of her perfume, now a symbol of her unwelcome intrusion, clung unpleasantly to the hallowed air of the study, long after the door clicked shut behind her. Silence fell, absolute and heavy, seeming to suck all sound from the room. It was not a peaceful silence, but a charged, vibrating void left by the recent storm. Brady placed both hands flat on the polished surface of the great desk, his head bowed slightly as he leaned into it. The ancient wood groaned softly under the immense pressure, and beneath his palms, the tips of his claws could just barely be seen, threatening to pierce the timber. He exhaled slowly, a long, controlled release of breath. The violent storm within him, tethered only by the immense strength of his alpha will. From the doorway, where she had evidently been standing for some time, Oakley's voice floated in, calm but edged with the cold, clear cut of ice. "I told you she'd try something reckless, Brady." Her tone held no "I told you so" smugness, only a steady, unwavering observation. Brady straightened, his jaw still tight, meeting his Luna's steady, knowing gaze. "She won't get a second chance to disgrace this lodge." His voice was low, firm, leaving no room for doubt or argument. And for once, even Oakley, known for her sharp wit and independent mind, didn't argue. She simply nodded, her expression grim, fully understanding the gravity of his declaration. Ash had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The midday sun streamed through the arched windows of the Wolf Lodge's grand banquet hall, illuminating dust motes dancing in the heavy air. Dozens of wolves, alphas, lunas, and respected elders from neighboring territories had gathered. The room was dense with the musk of strategy and politics. Alphas sat at the central table, their voices low and heavy as they debated border security and trade tariffs. Lunas clustered near the fireplace, their commentary softer, but their influence just as sharp. Oakley stood with the quiet poise of true authority, her eyes following the thread of conversation, engaging when necessary, her presence a silent testament to her position, but professionalism warred with the primal urge to protect. Her gaze was locked on her mate, Brady, and the irritating, golden shadow, Ash, who seemed determined to orbit him. Ash was draped in expensive, butter-yellow silk that seemed far too revealing for a formal summit. She had spent the last hour inventing errands near Brady's chair, retrieving a fallen napkin, offering redundant water refills, her laughter always a pitch too high. When she slipped behind him again, lingering a moment longer than necessary to brush her fingertips across the curve of his shoulder, Oakley's control evaporated. The low thrum of political discussion died abruptly as Oakley took 2 deliberate strides forward. The movement wasn't rushed, but it was absolute. Her voice carried through the massive hall, clear, resonant, and impossibly cold, like shattering ice. "Enough!" Every head snapped toward her. The alphas paused mid-sentence. Raymond, Ash's father, visibly flinched. Ash froze, her hand still hovering near Brady's nape, her carefully applied smile cracking. Brady merely leaned back, his powerful frame relaxed, storm-grey eyes glinting with a dangerous mix of amusement and anticipation. He knew Oakley. Knew that when she raised her voice, it was never wasted breath. For her to let it cut the air now meant Ash had crossed a line worth drawing blood over. Pride stirred in his chest, quiet but fierce, as he let her speak her mind. His silence wasn't absence, it was trust. A declaration in itself that his Luna's voice carried the weight of his own. Their 5-year-old son, Landon, who had been colouring quietly under the table, scrambled into his father's lap, sensing the seismic shift in the room's energy. Oakley advanced, stepping into the space between Ash and Brady. Her shadow fell over the younger woman. "You walk around here draped in silk, Ash, and you believe that makes you a woman," Oakley began, her delivery precise, each syllable weighted. "Let me educate you. A woman knows her place, firmly beside her alpha, supporting him. She does not claw like a stray for another man's attention." Gasps filled the space, particularly from the Stone Creek contingent. Alpha Raymond's usually robust shoulders hunched. His Luna, Elizabeth, closed her eyes as if to block the impending humiliation. Oakley leaned in slightly, though her voice never rose above that chillingly calm tone. You, Ash, are nothing more than a nuisance, a disruption to the conversation. A child that doesn't know her place at all, and that is exactly what you are. You are not a woman. You are a petulant girl fighting over a toy you can't have. Ash's lips trembled violently, her wide eyes reflecting raw shock and rising tears. When your games reach the point that I must step in, that is the last line you will ever cross in my territory, Oakley continued, utterly unforgiving. But because you are still a child, I'll give you this single warning. Play your games again, and you will learn just how unforgiving a Luna of the Wolf Lodge can be. Ash began to shake, clearly overwhelmed by the collective stare of 24 of the most powerful wolves in the state. She genuinely looked as though she might dissolve into tears. It was then that Landon, nestled safely in Brady's embrace, pointed a chubby finger at Ash and piped up, his innocent voice carrying perfectly through the sudden, fragile silence. She made Mama mad. He tugged lightly at Brady's collar, tilting his little face up. Hey, Daddy, is she being naughty? Send her to her room for time out. The simple, unvarnished truth of a child cut deeper than any calculated insult. A wave of nervous, muffled laughter broke out amongst the spectators. It wasn't friendly laughter. It was validation of Oakley's every word. Oakley ignored the reaction, her gaze fixed on Ash. You're nothing but a spoiled brat, Ash, she finished, her voice ringing with the finality of a death sentence. Unworthy of any alpha. The subsequent silence was crushing. Ash's breath hitched, her face blotched scarlet, the humiliation searing. Raymond pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead, utterly defeated by his daughter's indiscretion. The other alphas exchanged respectful, acknowledging nods toward Oakley, a show of solidarity for a strong partner protecting her family. But Ash, she wasn't broken. Not entirely. She swallowed the hot tears threatening to fall, clenched her fists so hard the silk dug into her palms, and forced a defiant, if shaky, smile. The trembling in her body she dismissed as justified anger. The collective condemnation she immediately twisted in her mind. They all saw the way she reacted. They saw her lose control. She felt threatened. In that moment of public ruin, Ash transformed the truth. It wasn't that she was unworthy. It was that Oakley was terrified of the competition. She had been proven effective. The Luna had resorted to insults and threats because she was insecure. Jealousy, Ash thought darkly, straightening her skirt and turning away with what dignity she could muster. That's all this was. She's only doing this because she knows I could take him. That dark thought curdled in her gut, transforming humiliation not into repentance, but into cold, unwavering resolve. She was not leaving. Not now. The game, she decided, had just become far more dangerous. The neutral grounds, usually a vibrant hub of pack life, thrummed with the late afternoon's familiar cadence. The air carried the earthy scent of pine needles warmed by the waning sun, mingled with the sharper tang of sweat from the sparring ring, where younger, eager wolves honed their skills, their grunts and the thwack of practice poles punctuating the air. Nearby, alphas, their brows furrowed in concentration, debated complex territory lines, their voices deep and resonant, while Lunas, elegant and serene, shared quiet conversations amidst the rustling leaves, their laughter like soft chimes. Amidst this organized chaos, 5-year-old Landon, clutching his beloved stuffed wolf Coda under one arm, was a blur of pure, unadulterated energy. He darted among the other children, his bursts of laughter a bright, clear counterpoint to the drone of adult discussions. His small, quick movements a testament to his boundless spirit. From a shadowed alcove formed by a gnarled oak, Ash watched him. Her gaze was not one of idle observation, but a cold, assessing scrutiny. She processed every detail, the way Brady's eyes, usually sharp and wary, softened almost imperceptibly as they tracked his son's movements. the quiet, unwavering intensity with which Oakley, the fierce Luna, shadowed Landon, a silent, maternal guardian. Ash noted the subtle relaxation in the alpha's hard lines, the brief, almost imperceptible smiles that touched his lips when Landon's laughter reached him. And in that moment, as clear as the setting sun, Ash understood. She understood the core, the nexus of Brady's formidable strength, and paradoxically, his most profound vulnerability. A slow, predatory smile spread across her lips. It wasn't born of warmth or amusement, but of a chilling revelation. She had found it. Her first attempt was cloaked in deceptive innocence, a subtle probe. Ash appeared as if from nowhere, a vision of carefully curated grace in a flowing gown of forest green, holding a small pouch of candied nuts. They gleamed like amber jewels, wrapped in a square of finely woven linen. She crouched, a predatory grace in her movements, at the very edge of the boisterous play circle. Her posture, inviting, non-threatening. "These are for you, little Alpha," she cooed, her voice a syrupy whisper, deceptively sweet, as her long painted nails extended the sugary offering toward Landon. Landon, however, inherited his parents' discernment. He paused mid-stride, his bright eyes narrowing slightly as he regarded her. He wrinkled his nose in distaste, a clear rejection even before he spoke. "I don't want your food." Brady was there in an instant, a blur of motion driven by instinct. His large hand settled firmly, protectively, on Landon's small shoulder, grounding him. His eyes, typically a warm hazel, had turned to chips of glacial ice as his glare sliced toward Ash, sharp and unforgiving. His voice was a low growl, vibrating with controlled fury. "You will not approach him again?" The vibrant hum of the neutral grounds died. The air chilled, growing heavy and thick with unspoken tension. Conversations faltered, then ceased entirely. A ripple went through the assembled packs. Alphas exchanged uneasy glances, whispers sparking like dry tinder around the edges of the gathering. Raymond, Ash's father, shifted uncomfortably, his face mottling with a deep, humiliating red. But Ash, ever the actress, merely laughed lightly, a bright, brittle sound that did little to mask the spark of humiliation in her eyes. She tilted her head, a picture of feigned innocence. "I was merely being kind. Surely there's no harm in that." Oakley stepped forward, her presence a silent challenge to Ash's manipulative charm. Her voice was cool, cutting like honed steel, each word precise and deliberate. When kindness hides motive, it's poison. Ash's carefully constructed composure flickered, and she flinched, a subtle tightening around her eyes, but she held her ground, refusing to retreat. She absorbed the blow, filing it away. The next day, her resolve undiminished, she tried again. This time, her offering was a small, intricately carved wooden wolf, painted a striking silver, its eyes made of tiny obsidian chips. Ash moved with a serpent's stealth, pressing the toy into Landon's small, unsuspecting hands when Oakley, for a brief, crucial moment, turned her attention to greet Elise of Iron Fang. But Brady's enforcer, a hulking male named Jax, was a shadow in the Alpha's periphery, faster than thunder. Before Landon could even register the gift, Jax's powerful hand snatched the toy away, his grip firm as he shoved it back into Ash's chest with a silent, menacing warning. "Do not touch the boy." A collective gasp echoed around them, louder this time, less restrained. Elise of Iron Fang, her own expression grim, muttered to Oakley, her voice low but carrying, "She's making herself a danger, Luna." Another Luna, her face etched with disapproval, shook her head slowly. "Raymond must control her. This reflects poorly on all of us." All eyes, heavy with expectation and judgment, turned to the Stone Creek Alpha. Raymond's jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out in relief, his humiliation a palpable force radiating from him. He knew what they were thinking. His daughter was an embarrassment, a liability, But before Raymond could pull himself together, Brady's voice rolled over the hall like an approaching storm, a primal, earth-deep growl that set knives of silence into the air. "Your daughter is warned." Again, the single sentence landed like a verdict. Every wolf in the room felt the unasked question hanging in the hush. How many warnings had Raymond been given before this one? How many chances had Ash squandered while her father stood by? The thought sat heavy and awful. If an alpha could not discipline his own blood, how could he be trusted to keep treaties, to watch borders, to protect the packs who relied on his word? The doubt spread through the circle as fast and cold as frost. Brady's words came slow then, clipped and loaded with menace. "If she looks at my son with intent, if she so much as breathes on him without permission, she will learn what alpha wrath truly means. And I promise you, Raymond, it is a lesson neither she nor your pack will soon forget." The threat was not a temper. It was a final notice. It sank into bone and memory, and in that silence Raymond seemed smaller than he had ever looked. An alpha whose authority had frayed under the weight of his daughter's arrogance. The growl sank into every bone, a vibration of raw power that commanded instant, absolute silence. Even Ash shivered involuntarily, a cold claw of fear briefly gripping her heart, though she forced her lips into a defiant, if fragile, smile. Raymond swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He nodded stiffly, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his pack's collective shame. "I'll speak to her," he managed, but the words rang hollow, thin and utterly devoid of conviction. Everyone saw it, the evident lack of control, the crushing humiliation of a father whose child was openly and repeatedly undermining his authority, making his entire pack look weak and subordinate. Ash's eyes, however, glittered with a dark, triumphant light as she stepped back, her smirk never wavering. She twisted Brady's incandescent fury, his protective rage, into something else entirely, something she could wield. To her, his possessive protectiveness wasn't a warning. It was a screaming, undeniable confirmation. She had found it. She had found the weapon. The innocent, vulnerable heart of his son, that would wound him most deeply, and she intended to use it, no matter the cost. The neutral grounds were a tension wire strung between celebration and caution. The scent of roasted meat and mingled pack loyalty fought against the underlying metallic tang of worry. The evening sky had bled out, leaving behind a velvet dark punctuated by the hungry, shifting gold of dozens of torches mounted on tall posts. Wolves sparred at the far ring, their rough play providing a deceptive soundtrack of normalcy. Brady and Oakley were anchors of vigilance. They stood just outside the circle of pups, watching Landon, who was happily engrossed in a game of chase with a trio of younger wolves from Iron Fang and River Bend. Landon was laughing, his small body unburdened for the moment, but Brady's posture remained rigid, his alpha sense sharp with protective instinct. His world was concentrated in that small, happy boy, and the world, especially the one containing Ash, always required guarding. Ash did not move erratically. She moved like a shadow seeking the deepest shade. She observed, cataloguing the moment Oakley turned to exchange quiet, diplomatic words with Elise of Iron Fang, and the precise instant Brady's steely focus was deliberately pulled by Marcus's insistence on a detailed and lengthy discussion of the northern trade routes. It was a window of seconds, and she utilized every millisecond. She slipped into the ring of children, her movements too fluid, too silken for the bright torchlight. "Landon," she cooed, her voice a low, cloying note that didn't match the celebratory noise of the gathering. She held out a pale, manicured hand, not asking, but commanding. "Come, walk with me. I'll show you where the river glows with fireflies. It will be our secret, just the two of us." Landon's joy instantly evaporated. His little shoulders hitched, and he backed away, clutching his beloved stuffed wolf, Coda, like a shield. His large eyes darted toward his parents. They were too far. "No," he managed. the single word thin and brittle. Ash didn't retreat. She crouched low, invading his space, making herself seem sympathetic and massive at the same time. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Don't be silly. You'll like it. Come, don't you want to be special?" Before her fingers could brush the sleeve of his tunic, a hand like iron clamped down on her wrist. The grip belonged to Darius, the beater of River Bend. Darius was a towering figure, renowned for his sense of justice and his absolute intolerance for manipulation. Scars crisscrossed his knuckles, and his gaze was granite. His voice, naturally deep, was projected deliberately, carrying over the ambient noise like the crack of ice. "What game are you playing, girl?" Ash yanked her arm free, rubbing the spot where his fingers had bruised her skin. Her perfect composure fractured, replaced by a flash of petty fury that she quickly tried to mask with indignation. "I was only being kind, better Darius," extending an invitation. Darius did not budge. He stood between Ash and Landon, a wall of pure, disapproving better authority. His growl resonated, a low earthquake that demanded silence. "Kind?" Darius's voice cut through the air, reaching every ear within the clearing. He projected the phrase not just to Ash, but to the entire assembly. "You were cornering an alpha's son, and I saw the terror in his eyes when you pressed him. That is no kindness." The line landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ensuing silence was thick and immediate. Conversations ceased. The sparring at the far ring stopped. Darius didn't break eye contact with Ash, but his eyes swept the gathering, challenging anyone present to disagree. "Do you dishonor your father so openly? Do you dishonor the blood of Stone Creek by making a threat look like a friendly greeting?" The torches hissed, echoing the collective gasp of the gathered wolves. Darius's accusation, that she was publicly dishonoring her entire legacy, spread through the hall like wildfire. Raymond, who had been discussing logistics nearby, froze. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him pale and sweating under the torchlight. The humiliation was total, public, and delivered by an outsider. He stumbled forward, fury battling with profound, self-inflicted shame. "Ash!" Raymond's voice cracked, not with alpha authority, but with the despair of a desperate father. "I have warned you, do not go near Landon again." But Ash didn't flinch from her father's rage. She adjusted her tunic and smirked, a sliver of cruel satisfaction gracing her lips. "Everyone makes such a fuss. He's just a child, father. I merely wanted to chat." She didn't grasp the gravity of the scrutiny because she was fundamentally incapable of seeing beyond her own desire. "He is my heir," Brady's voice finally thundered. It was not a shout, but a thick, guttural resonance that rolled through the pines and rattled the very ground. The growl was dangerous, primal, and absolute. The surrounding children, frightened by the raw power, shrank into their mother's skirts. Oakley placed a calm, steady hand on Brady's heavily muscled forearm, yet her eyes blazed with a fierce, luminous fire directed entirely at Ash. Darius reinforced the charge, turning his attention to the true source of the problem. "Alpha Raymond, if you cannot leash your daughter, if you cannot control this spiteful behavior, you dishonor every alpha here. We do not gather to endure spoiled brats who stalk and endanger the heirs of neighboring lands." The words were precise, surgical, and devastating to Stone Creek's reputation. Raymond's face grew scarlet with impotent fury. Shame coiled around him like a suffocating chain, and he knew he had to act, even if his action was futile. He grabbed Ash's arm, not with strength, but with a desperate, trembling need to salvage his status. "You will hold your tongue and your place, immediately. Get back to the pavilion." Ash jerked away but complied, her lip curling in disdain. As she walked past Darius and her father, her eyes flickered rapidly to Brady. The alpha of Wolf Lodge was vibrating with barely contained violence, his eyes narrowed to slits of cold warning. In Ash's twisted reality, she didn't see the public shaming. She didn't register her father's professional disgrace. She only registered Brady's volcanic reaction. It wasn't a warning dot, it was proof. Proof that she had his singular attention. Proof that she mattered. The rest of the hall saw only two things. Alpha Raymond, utterly humiliated, failing to impose control over his rogue daughter, and Ash, walking away with a triumphant, glittering smirk, confirming that she felt zero remorse. She wasn't finished. She wasn't even close. The council fire blazed high, a greedy, primal entity whose restless flames clawed at the vast indigo abyss of the night sky. Around the sacred ancient stones of the meeting circle, the Alphas sat, their lunars positioned strategically beside them. Enforcers, silent and watchful, formed a tense perimeter, their silver armbands catching the shifting light. Tonight was meant to be a forging, a grueling but necessary effort towards strength and unity. Trade agreements between the Mountain Path and Wolf Lodge, cooperative patrol treaties against rogue threats, protection pacts built on mutual respect. Neutral ground was not merely a location, it was a covenant. Instead, the covenant had been steadily desecrated, and the meeting had devolved into a stage for rank humiliation. Ash lingered too close to the fire for propriety, the expensive silks of her gown whispering against the stone as she shifted, strutting as though the entire congregation were gathered solely for her entertainment. Her behavior was a calculated campaign of disruption. She interrupted Alpha Marcus mid-sentence with a laugh, a sharp, high sound that grated on the silence like broken glass. She whispered too loudly to Elias's son, leaning in close enough to expose the vulnerable curve of her neck, rolling her eyes dramatically at the boring politics of resource allocation. And repeatedly, inevitably, her hungry gaze slid back to Brady, burning with a consuming, unashamed intensity. When Luna Oakley spoke of famine preparation, Ash scoffed audibly, kicking a small, loose pebble across the stone floor. When another Luna added her sensible voice, Ash leaned back, sneering openly, her disregard blatant. The air, already thick with the scent of pine smoke and damp earth, thickened further with sheer irritation. The fragile alliances that should have been mending under the firelight frayed visibly with every smug tilt of her head, every unnecessary rustle of her dress. Brady's patience, always finite when dealing with calculated malice, snapped. He rose slowly, a looming mountain shedding its composure. The heavy oak chair he occupied did not simply move. It protested. The back legs scraped the polished, ancient stone in a low, agonizing growl of friction that sliced through the murmuring conversation, sounding less like wood on stone and more like a primal challenge. The entire circle hushed instantly. Brady's presence filled the firelit space like a sudden gravitational storm cloud pressing toward the earth. The sheer, overwhelming weight of his raw alpha authority dragged every head down and every eye toward him. Enough! The word was not shouted. It was a single, devastating tone produced deep in his chest, a crack of alpha command, a thunderclap that didn't just silence men, but demanded absolute obedience from the very environment. Outside the immediate circle of light, the persistent chorus of crickets and unseen night insects abruptly cut off, as if a physical pressure wave had choked the air supply. Even the crackle of the great fire seemed to settle and subdue itself in deference. Ash, mid-smirk, froze entirely. Her eyes went wide, the colour momentarily draining from her face. Brady took one deliberate step forward, his shadow stretching long and monstrous across the council grounds, eclipsing Raymond's seated figure entirely. His eyes were no longer merely annoyed. They were molten silver, unforgiving and ancient. Then he looked straight at Ash. You speak over alphas. You sneer at Lunas. You lie. You disrespect. You behave like a spoiled infant, while wolves greater than you discuss matters that decide the lives and deaths of hundreds across 4 united territories. His words were low, guttural, yet resonated with such alpha weight that they vibrated in the bones of every wolf present. Ash's knees trembled violently beneath the fine silk. For a terrifying fraction of a second, Genuine, crippling fear flashed across her features. But then, the sickness of her delusion twisted that fear into something recognizable, something perverse. Her lips curved into a sly, breathless smile despite the terror gripping her chest. "So fierce when you're angry," she whispered, her voice husky and challenging. "You sound almost. Silence. Do not speak unless you are spoken to." The final command slammed into her like a physical blow. Even she, driven by obsession, could not speak against the purity of that dominant tone. Her mouth clamped shut, her chest heaving as she fought the instinctive urge to drop to her knees. Brady didn't waste another glance on her. He turned his chilling glare to Raymond, Ash's alpha father. His voice cut as clean and merciless as a freshly honed blade. This meeting was meant to solidify an alliance council. Trade agreements? Patrol treaties? Strengthening the bonds that keep our pack solvent and safe? Instead, your pack, specifically, one person, has turned this sacred circle into a mockery. Every alpha here is on edge. Every Luna was insulted and disregarded. You have brought a deep and unforgivable shame upon this ground. Raymond's face burned a desperate, painful crimson. Sweat slicked his brow beneath his tightly pulled hair. He couldn't meet the eyes of his peers, his own failure as both leader and father laid bare publicly. He looked small, inadequate, beneath the relentless scrutiny. Brady stepped closer to the fire, the heat doing nothing to diminish the chilling effect of his proximity. His voice deepened further, vibrating with a primal, ruling alpha fury. "If you cannot, as an alpha and as a father, enforce respect and control your own blood, then this will be your last invitation. Wolf Lodge will not stand shoulder to shoulder with a pack that cannot guarantee its representative will not sabotage matters of territory and survival. Your daughter has made a mockery of your alliance, Raymond. Fix it, or lose it entirely." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, punctuated only by the nervous shifting of the enforcers. Ash's face was now blanched, her father's utter humiliation, a visible, agonizing weight settling upon his shoulders. Alpha Elise of Iron Fang leaned into her husband, her lips tight. "He's right," she muttered grimly. "This farce can't continue if we are to survive." Raymond finally forced himself to speak, his words stiff, his voice a hollow echo of authority. I understand, Alpha Brady. It will not happen again. I swear it." But Ash only leaned back slightly, her tremor of fear giving way to a dangerous, manic excitement. The smirk flickered back into place, deeper and more entrenched than before. She was trembling from the force of his command. Yes, but in her twisted, self-serving mind, Brady's eruption was not rejection. It was proof of passion. Proof that she had seized his attention entirely. Proof that his rage was merely the disguise for the intense possessive need she was convinced he felt for her. "He noticed me," her inner voice screamed triumphantly. "He is utterly consumed by me." Her delusion deepened and solidified, even as the fragile threads of alliance that bound the rival packs together snapped under the weight of one spoiled, utterly dangerous girl. The Lunas met early, the quiet sun of late autumn warming the granite terrace where they had gathered away from the boisterous main fire. It was engineered to be a soft hour. Tea, the gentle clinking of porcelain, and talk of children and harvests. The small governance that kept packs stitched together. Oakley walked into that circle like a tide change. Calm on the surface, impossible to ignore beneath the veneer of light conversation. She wore the authority of her mate, Alpha Brady, not borrowed, but earned, draped over her like an invisible mantle. Ash drifted there as well, a contrived flutter of silk skirts and expensive perfume, attempting to occupy space as if she had every right to be included. The elder Lunas tolerated her because pack politeness demanded it. Oakley tolerated her because she had to, until the moment she decided the cost of that toleration was too high. "Good morning," Oakley said, folding gracefully into the main chair beside the stone table. Her voice was easy, the kind that initially put people at ease and then held them to an unspoken, rigorous standard. Around the circle, the Lunas smiled politely, sipped, and murmured about patrol schedules and winter supply concerns. But Oakley's attention was a missile, finding Ash in a heartbeat. Finding the way the girl preened on the edge of the group like a decorative, yet poisonous insect waiting to strike. Ash leaned forward, her voice cloyingly sweet, a calculated attempt at an insult wrapped in concern. Luna Oakley, you must be utterly exhausted keeping that fierce husband of yours on such a short leash. How do you manage such ferocity? A single, amused corner of Oakley's mouth quirked upward. She set down her cup, the sound precise and final. I keep him on a leash because he belongs to our pack and our future. I keep him on a leash because I am his Luna. There's a difference between a handler and a partner, Ash. One serves, the other leads. Ash laughed. The sound brittle and high. Is that what you teach your little one? To bark and growl at anyone who looks at his father? Oakley's eyes went to Landon, who sat a respectable distance away, quietly playing with a polished stone near the steps. Her heavy cloak draped over his shoulders for warmth. He looked up, sensing the shift in mood, and scowled instinctively when Ash's gaze slid to him. A small boy's instinct, blunt, honest, and protective, pulled on Oakley's heart like a string on a bell. Oakley's voice lowered to an impossible stillness, but every word hammered into the air. Children learn by watching. They learn courage, temperance, and loyalty. They also learn shame. Ash tossed a strand of hair back, as if the word were a mere dust mote. And what does he learn from you? To scare anyone who glances at his father? That's not what I taught him, Oakley said. Her eyes were now fixed entirely on Ash. But he learned not to let predators come near what is his. He learned to value what's worth defending. The circle shifted uncomfortably. Two Lunas exchanged sharp glances. A third murmured something about the need for dignity in public address. Oakley let the silence deepen for a painful heartbeat. Then she turned, slow, deliberate, and devastating, toward Elizabeth, Ash's mother, who had arrived late and sat pale and watchful beside Raymond. Elizabeth, Oakley said, and the name carried the weight of absolute courtesy, which only amplified the cruelty of what followed. You raised her. Elizabeth's fingers tightened around her tea to the point of white. I, she stammered. Then I will tell you plainly, Oakley went on, cutting across the protest with chilling finality. You have failed her as a Luna and as a mother. You have allowed indulgence to replace discipline. You have allowed arrogance to grow where humility should be planted. Your silence while she speaks down to others is a louder betrayal than any punishment you could have given. Conversations died instantaneously, the air thick with the smell of political execution. Even Ash's practiced haughtiness thinned under the cold heat of the accusation, recognizing that the attack had moved past her and struck at the foundational respect for her family. Elizabeth flinched, a quick human contraction of the shoulders, breaking years of careful Luna passivity. Her lips trembled, and she looked desperately at Raymond, shame written in the pale, tight lines around her mouth. I will address this, she began, a weak promise, but Raymond's hand closed over hers with a gesture of regret and utter impotence. He did not speak for her then, knowing any defense now would be useless. Oakley's eyes slid back to Ash. She spoke to the girl like a teacher delivering a final, unyielding grade. Kalem, precise, final. You play games with airs and you think it clever. But a Luna keeps the hearth and the future. Luna protects children. She does not toy with them or subject them to ridicule. You have no sense of stewardship. You have none of the dignity required to stand beside an alpha. You are not a woman here. You are a disgrace. You are a stain. Ash's breath hitched. Colour fled and then dramatically flooded her face, mixing shame and fury into a mottled mask. For the first time in weeks, perhaps ever in public, she actually trembled. The room hummed with the collective intake of breath. Shock at the bluntness. Admiration for Oakley's unflinching authority. and a deep professional pity for a woman who had been publicly raked bare. Then, something dangerous flickered across Ash's features. Not submission, but contempt deepening into pure malice. She lifted her chin, attempting to regain control, but the attempt lacked the venom of her usual attacks. "Jealousy suits you," she whispered. But it lacked conviction even to herself. A younger Luna, from the distant Red Hollow pack, stood up, capitalizing on the moment of vulnerability. If she endangers heirs, if she dishonors the council, what do we do? Can Raymond be allowed to lead when his child is actively tearing the fabric of our consensus? Voices rose immediately, some soft with concern, others sharp with political opportunism. The mood of the room shifted entirely from polite conference to an official tribunal. Accusations spread like frost across the polished stone. Raymond's face sank lower with every murmur. Elizabeth's hands finally began to shake visibly. Oakley didn't need to rise to shout. She maintained her stillness and said, quiet and contained, "Accountability is not humiliation, though it may feel like it. It is preservation. If Stone Creek cannot govern its own, then Stone Creek will pay the price. That is the weight of leadership, Raymond." Raymond swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. "I will speak to her. I will curb her influence." Brady's growl rumbled low, the sound more dangerous for its restraint. "You will you? How many chances have you been given, Raymond, and failed to act? How many more times must this council remind you to police your own child, when it should be instinct for any alpha? If you cannot discipline your own blood, why should we trust you to protect your pack or honor your treaties?" Oakley's gaze cut in then, steady and merciless. "And if you cannot, this council will find its way without the influence of Stone Creek entirely." Her words were not cruel. They were a ledger being closed. Ash felt the walls closing around her inflated pride, and for a terrifying moment, the savor of absolute control slipped like grain through her fingers. Every past glance, every tut, every reprimand, had failed to touch the bright, hard core of her pride, because she always found a way to turn it, twist it, or ignore it. But Oakley's condemnation smelled of finality. It had the backing of the Women's Council, the murmurs of alphas beyond the terrace. It felt permanent. Ash left before the council's formal decisions could be drawn. She walked with a swan's carriage, a rigid attempt at dignity. But each step was heavy, like a stone dropped into a still lake, the ripples of her humiliation spreading in her wake. She retreated to the shadowed walkways beyond the pines, and there, alone where only the distant, indifferent sun could see her, she folded into hate. If she could not have Brady, if his rejections wounded her pride with such a profound public scar, then she would no longer merely covet what she could not possess. She would rend what he loved. She would reach for his son, and she would hold him up to the light and cut him where it mattered most. "I need to wound him where it hurts," she mutters, her voice a dry rasp, fingers white on the hem of her gown. "Make him bleed for the future. Make Oakley watch what happens when you discard a woman like me." In the cool, darkening wash of the pines, Ash's reflection did not look like a daughter or a scorned lover. It looked like a honed blade. The Lunas' meeting ended shortly after, moving quickly from public judgment back to oak-smooth diplomacy and undercurrented steel. The council dispersed under restrained conversation. Oakley stayed a heartbeat longer, watching the path Ash had taken into the trees, feeling the thrum of something dark and deliberate move through the pack. A threat that would not be quelled by words alone. Raymond's humiliation settled like ash over his shoulders. Elizabeth's silence had been broken, and now both families would watch. The protections of old alliances were frayed. The next move would have to be more than admonishment. And in the dark, where plans take root, Ash sharpened her intent on the innocent face of the Alpha's heir. The night was restless, a churning beast of cold air and shadows. A fierce, relentless wind rushed through the sentinel pines surrounding the central compound, making the massive torches sputter and flare violently. The flickering light cast long, skeletal shadows that stretched and crawled across the neutral grounds, Most of the packs had retreated to their quarters after the long council meetings, but a few hardened sentries still prowled the borders, their attention focused outward. Inside the central lodge, where the air was thick with smoke and residual tension, voices still lingered, hushed, heavy, and tired. Landon should have been asleep hours ago, curled under thick furs, his beloved stuffed wolf Coda tucked beneath his chin. But Ash had been watching, waiting, her patience a cold, hard thing. She knew the boy would never follow her willingly. He had rejected her too many times, his instincts already keen enough, even at his age, to sense the rot beneath her honeyed smiles. Landon adored his father with every fibre of his small, vulnerable body. And it was that adoration, that devotion, that Ash intended to weaponize. She had overheard enough a few days earlier. A careless, tender promise made by a busy alpha to weave her perfect trap. She found him padding down the long cold hallway toward his chamber, his small hand clutching Coda's worn paw like a lifeline. "Landon," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sighing wind outside. She crouched low, her midnight blue silks whispering like dried leaves on the stone floor. "Your father sent me." Landon's eyes, pale and sharp like his father's, narrowed instantly. "No, he didn't. Daddy doesn't like you." Ash forced a laugh, light and practiced, a sound utterly devoid of warmth. "He doesn't like me around him, no. But he asked me to fetch you. He's gone to the river to look for something special. Fireflies. He said you should come see." Landon froze. His small hand tightened convulsively on Coda's paw. His father had made that promise just days ago, a casual vow to show him the magical lights that danced along the riverbanks when the night was warm enough. The thought of it, of that secret, special time with Brady, made his small heart ache with longing, and for the first time, his doubt wavered. Ash smiled, sensing the psychological crack. He said not to tell anyone, just you and him, a secret between Alpha and Air. That word, Air, hit Landon's chest like a spark of pride. His father had used it only once before, voice proud and deep. The thought of being part of a secret mission with Brady, of standing tall as his father's little wolf. It pulled him forward before his instincts could mount their argument. Ash held out her elegant hand, and after a hesitant, fatal beat, Landon placed his small, trusting fingers in hers. She led him out into the night. The moment they stepped past the lodge doors, the cold air slapped Landon's face, shocking his breath away. They circumvented the sputtering torches, slipping past the watchful eyes of distracted enforcers gathered near the council fires. Ash's gown whispered across the uneven stone steps as they descended into the dark tree line, her grip on Landon's hand firm, almost painfully urgent. The river was a primal force this season, swollen and fierce from the runoff of the mountain snows. It was not a welcoming sound. Its deep, incessant current created a continuous, hungry roar that swallowed all other noise. Ash stopped abruptly at the lip of the bank, hidden by the weeping willows, her eyes glittering with cold satisfaction as she looked down at the boy. "There, go on," she commanded, nodding toward the churning water. "Your father's waiting." Landon looked around, confused, knitting his small brow. The shadows were vast and deep. No tall, comforting figure stood waiting by the frantic banks. The river roared in his ears, but no voice called for him. He turned back to Ash, his teeth beginning to chatter from the cold. "I don't see him," he whispered, the sound immediately devoured by the turbulent air. Her lips curled into a perfect, malicious crescent. "Then wait, I'm sure he'll come." And with that, she released his hand. It was not a gentle release, it was a drop. Landon stumbled forward slightly, losing his balance, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ash didn't look back. She turned on her heel, her silks whispering like snakeskin in the dry leaves, and began to climb the dark slope back toward the warmth and light of the compound. Landon stood stranded at the edge of the rushing water, clutching Coda close. The sound of the river was huge and terrifying now. A liquid monster. His small voice, high-pitched and fragile, rose above the relentless noise. "Daddy?" No answer. Only the river, hungry and loud. He called again, a panicked, thin plea. "Daddy!" The fear overwhelmed him. He didn't understand what was happening, only that he was alone and abandoned in the deepest, coldest dark he had ever known. He began to sob, tearing, desperate sounds wrenched from his small chest as the cold air bit his skin. Ash, meanwhile, walked swiftly up the path. She listened for the terror behind her, absorbing it like a deep, satisfying draught. She walked straight into the firelit hall, her chin high, her expression calm. Inside her head, a cold, smooth voice congratulated her. Cleverness, she thought. This is not cruelty. This is efficient. He would come running. Brady would be forced to break. And when he found his son, cold and hysterical, he would finally see the cracks in his perfect life and realize who truly held the power. But she didn't account for who else had been watching the shadows tonight. Back at the lodge's main hearth, Oakley stiffened so suddenly her knife hand twitched. A deep, primal mother's instinct, cold and sharp, clawed at her spine. Seconds later, Brady, mid-conversation with an envoy, felt it too. The sudden, terrifying absence of his son's presence in the Alpha Bond. Like a hole had been punched clean through his chest. The alarm went up like wildfire, a primal scream echoing through the Alpha's halls. Landon was gone. Brady's roar shook the very foundations of the hall, rattling plates in the kitchen and sending tremors through the ancient stone walls. In an instant, the celebratory evening shattered into a desperate hunt. Wolves scattered into the blinding night, their torches flaring like angry eyes as they spilled out into the dense, unforgiving forest. The air filled with the frantic rustle of their movements, dry leaves crunching underfoot, branches snapping sharply, the guttural, desperate calls of pack members echoing Landon's name, each cry laced with a growing terror. Torches hissed and sputtered against the damp air, casting erratic shadows that danced like spectres of their fears. Oakley clutched the sleeve of an enforcer, her voice steady despite the wild, untamed fear that clawed at her eyes. The river! Search the river! Brady was already a blur, his powerful stride devouring the ground, leaving a trail of disturbed earth and snapping twigs. His voice, a thunderous, raw sound, cut across the packlands with each desperate call of Landon's name. Oakley, refusing to be left behind, kept close, her elegant skirt snagging on thorns and roots, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm that mirrored his. And then, Darius of River Bend appeared, panting heavily, shoving a glowing phone into Oakley's hands as they ran. The stark light of the screen illuminated a chilling sight. Ash, her smile cold and predatory, leading Landon by the hand, her silken robes whispering against the gnarled trees. The casual cruelty of the image burned itself into their minds. Oakley's breath caught a choked gasp of pure horror. Brady, seeing the image and sensing her terror, nearly ripped the device in half. A guttural growl, a sound that made even his own hardened enforcers shudder, rolled through the trees. She touched him. She led him. His voice cracked with a volatile fury that promised absolute destruction. I'll tear her apart. But there was no time for revenge, not yet. They had to find Landon. The search stretched on, an agonizing eternity. Minutes bled into what felt like hours, each passing moment a fresh stab of dread. The calls of Landon's name grew hoarser, more desperate, mingling with the distant, mournful howls of actual wolves, adding to the terrifying atmosphere. They searched for ages, every shadow a potential hiding place, every rustle of leaves a false hope. The river's roar grew steadily louder, a white-foamed beast thrashing against the banks, its sound chilling them to the bone. And then, a tiny, broken cry, barely audible above the torrent. "Daddy!" Brady barreled through the tangled underbrush, branches whipping his face, leaving angry red welts. His claws were half unsheathed in the frenzied charge, his wolf snarling just beneath the surface. He found his boy perched precariously on a slick moss-covered rock at the very edge of the roaring torrent, clutching his stuffed wolf. Mud streaked across his little knees. Landon's entire small body trembled, his chest heaved with gut-wrenching sobs, and tears streamed down his dirt-streaked face. He was beyond terrified. A tiny, lost soul clinging to life by a thread. Brady dropped to his knees, his own body shaking with a profound mixture of terror and incandescent rage, and pulled Landon against him so fiercely the boy squeaked. His hands, usually so strong and steady, trembled violently as he gripped his son's small shoulders, scanning him frantically for wounds, for bruises, for any sign of harm that would confirm his worst fears. "I've got you, pup," Brady rasped, his voice breaking with emotion, his cheek pressed to Landon's wet hair. "You're safe! Oh, my boy, you're safe!" Landon sniffled against his chest, his little fists clutching at Brady's tunic. "Daddy, where were you?" His voice was small, wavering. "She told me you had fireflies." Brady's arms tightened, a low, guttural sound rising from his throat. Oakley's hand pressed over her mouth, her eyes blazing with grief and fury. The lie was as cruel as the danger itself. Using wonder and trust to lure a child into peril, Oakley knelt beside them, her own tears blurring her vision as she pressed her lips to Landon's damp curls, murmuring assurances. For a moment, the whole world narrowed to the three of them. Alpha, Luna, Air. A family bound tighter than ever by the brutal whip of terror they had just endured. The immediate relief of finding Landon alive was a tidal wave, washing over their raw nerves. But when Brady finally rose, he passed Landon to Oakley, his face carved from fury itself. The storm in his eyes had not passed. It had only deepened, solidifying into something cold and deadly. Their immediate priority was getting Landon back to the Alpha's quarters, to the warmth of his bed, to safety, and to comfort him until the tremors stopped. Ash would wait. He turned to Darius, to the enforcers, to the pack members who had been there, who had witnessed Ash's treachery through the lens of a phone. His voice was low, deceptively calm, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Everyone saw?" Darius swallowed, his face pale in the torchlight as he nodded. "We did. We caught her on film, her hand on Landon's, leading him away. We thought, if we brought you proof, she couldn't twist her way out of it again. We meant to go back for him, Alpha, but when we returned, he was gone." Brady's jaw clenched, his whole frame trembling with the effort it took not to explode where he stood. The air around him seemed to hum with restrained violence, a storm caged only by the thinnest of walls. His silence was worse than any roar. It promised ruin. He looked back at Oakley, at the protective way she cradled their son close, pressing kisses to his forehead. His voice dropped to a guttural whisper that only she could hear, though the intensity of it vibrated through the silent forest. "She nearly took him from us." Oakley's eyes burned with a cold, clear fire. "Then tomorrow, she pays." Brady turned back to the gathering wolves, his growl carrying through the trees, a chilling pronouncement of fate. "At dawn," he snarled, his eyes dark with murderous intent, "we settle this." And the forest went utterly silent, every pack member waiting, holding their breath, for the terrifying storm that would surely break when the sun rose. But for now, their focus was solely on Landon, ensuring he was warm, safe, and comforted, far from the roaring river and the shadow of Ash's betrayal. Dawn painted the neutral grounds in a cold, unforgiving grey fire. The air was sharp, brittle, and heavy with the kind of oppressive silence that precedes an execution. Every Alpha, Luna, an enforcer from the allied packs had gathered in the Grand Council Hall, their faces etched with grim resolve, their eyes like burning embers fixed on the Stone Creek family, who had dragged shame and danger into the very heart of their alliance. Raymond stood stiffly at the far end of the long mahogany table, his shoulders hunched, his Alpha's aura flickering like a dying candle. His daughter, Ash was at his side. Her chin was tilted in a familiar, defiant gesture, but the pallor of her skin and the frantic flicker in her eyes betrayed the arrogant facade. Her once pristine silks were wrinkled and clung to her from the long, sleepless night. Her elaborate braids tangled from the humiliating walk back through the torchlit paths of their territory to the judgment hall. Yet, even in this dire moment, a flicker of that smug, untouchable air still clung to her. A last, desperate attempt at bravado. Not today. The collective unspoken thought resonated through the hall. The source of the day's fury rested on the polished center table, a sleek modern phone. Its screen replayed the damning truth again and again in an endless, sickening loop. Ash, her face illuminated by a mocking, triumphant smile, led 5-year-old Landon into the treacherous night. Her hand clutched the boy's, a gesture that now seemed less protective and more like a predator ensnaring its prey. The final, damning image of her turning her back, abandoning him to the thunderous roar of the river, left a sick, bile-like taste in every wolf's mouth. Brady stood like a statue carved from granite, his knuckles white as his hands gripped the edge of the table. His claws, partially unsheathed, dug deep gouges into the ancient wood, sending splinters flying with each involuntary clench. His storm-grey eyes, usually warm and reassuring, were now locked on Raymond, then searing into ash. His voice, when it finally came, was a low, guttural rumble, controlled only by the sheer, terrifying force of his rage. "You nearly cost me my son! My pup!" The word pup was spat out, emphasizing the vulnerability Ash had exploited. Ash flinched, a visible shudder passing through her, but her ingrained arrogance fought back. She tried to twist the narrative, her voice a brittle whisper. "He came with me willingly." The roar that tore out of Brady was primal, guttural, shaking the very rafters of the hall. It vibrated through the stone floor and settled deep in the chests of every wolf present. He slammed both fists onto the table, and with a crack like thunder, the massive oak split clean down the center, groaning and splintering. Dishes and goblets clattered to the floor, silver and ceramic scattering like shrapnel. Packs jumped to their feet, startled, hackles rising, but no one dared move between the enraged alpha and his target. "Do not speak," Brady's voice, now a terrifying bellow, shook the very stones of the foundation. "You led a 5-year-old child into danger. You left him by the river, alone, in the wilderness, at night. That is not a mistake. That is a crime. A betrayal of everything we stand for." Oakley rose beside him, her fury no less lethal, though her voice was a precision blade rather than a crushing hammer. Her eyes, usually gentle, were now cold, hard sapphires. "And it is not only her crime. It is yours, Raymond." The words cut him deeper than any claw could. Raymond looked at her, his jaw trembling, his composure finally fracturing. Oakley's gaze was merciless, unforgiving. "You let this girl grow up spoiled and arrogant, never hearing no without twisting it into a challenge to her fragile ego. You indulged her every whim, defended her every transgression. You let her strut through councils and gatherings, humiliating every alpha and Luna with her childish antics and venomous remarks. You failed to teach her respect for rank, for age, for life itself. You failed to leash her when she endangered a child, a pup who looked up to her. You saw her venomous nature and did nothing." Oakley's voice sharpened, each word a spike driving into Raymond's heart. "And that failure is not hers alone. It is yours. You are her alpha. You are her father. And you are to blame for the monster she has become." Raymond's face blanched to an ashen grey. The shame was suffocating, a physical weight pressing him down, threatening to crush him where he stood. His pack, lined up behind him, watched, some with lowered, averted eyes, others with faces burning with their own reflected disgrace. The other alphas began to murmur, a low, dangerous growl that built in volume. Marcus of Ironfang spoke first, his voice thick with unadulterated disgust. If Stone Creek cannot keep its bloodline in line, if they cannot protect even the most innocent among us, they cannot be trusted to hold alliances. Their word means nothing. Elise of Red Hollow, her own Luna at her side, added with chilling clarity. No trade, no treaties, no protection from our enforcers. This council does not, and will not, tolerate endangerment of heirs, especially not through malice. One by one, heads nodded in grim agreement. The tide had turned, swiftly and mercilessly. Raymond felt a cold dread seep into his bones, knowing the outcome was inevitable. Brady straightened, his fury cold now, utterly implacable. The raw emotion had been replaced by a chilling finality. You are exiled from this alliance, Raymond. Stone Creek is no longer welcome at this table, nor within our protection. You and your spoiled daughter will not stain these halls again. Gather your pack and leave before sundown. Ash's face contorted, her mouth opening in a fresh protest, a desperate, childish wail. She never got the words out. The sound came first, a whip crack so sharp it seemed to slice the air. Elizabeth's hand had lashed across her daughter's cheek with a force that rattled the hall. The impact spun Ash half sideways, silk skirts twisting, a crimson bloom rising instantly on her pale skin. Gasps rippled through the chamber, the silence broken only by the ringing echo of that strike. Ash staggered, stunned, her wide eyes struggling to process the humiliation. Before she could steady herself, Elizabeth's fingers clamped tight around her wrist, yanking her upright. The second slap landed even harder, snapping her head the other way, the sound like a gavel slamming down on a final verdict. The spoiled girl sagged, both cheeks burning, her composure shattered beyond repair. Elizabeth stood over her, chest heaving, eyes wet and merciless. "You are a spoiled little bitch," she spat, her voice raw with years of swallowed fury. "And I will no longer stand silent while you shame this pack." Elizabeth's voice trembled, but it carried, ripping through the stunned quiet like a banshee's wail, making everyone jump. It was a sound born of profound despair and incandescent fury. "You are a disgrace, both of you." Her glare, savage and wounded, swung from Ash to her husband. A father who cannot guide his child, who lets her rot from within, is no alpha worthy of his title. A daughter who endangers a pup out of petty jealousy and spite is no Luna in waiting, but a blight. You have dragged our pack's name through filth, through the mud of your failures. She turned, her shoulders slumping, and lowered her head before Brady and Oakley, her hands shaking uncontrollably, her face a mask of profound sorrow. "On behalf of every loyal wolf who carries the name Stone Creek, I beg your forgiveness. I know it will not erase what she has done, what we have allowed to happen. But please, let it be known, her shame, their shame, is not all of ours. I will put this right." The hall held its breath, witnessing the raw agony of a mother tearing herself apart to salvage what little honor remained. Oakley inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement more than absolution, a silent concession to Elizabeth's courage in the face of such public humiliation. Brady gave a curt, stiff nod, his arms crossed like iron bars across his chest, his eyes still holding a spark of their earlier fury, but also a flicker of grim respect for Elizabeth's sacrifice. Ash stood trembling, her cheek burning where her mother's hand had struck. The humiliation was absolute, searing into her very core. But even now, beneath the crushing weight of public disgrace, a bitter, poisonous hatred brewed. Her eyes, brimming with unshed tears of rage, slid toward Brady, her hatred coiling tight and dangerous as a cornered snake. If she could not have him, she swore she would make him suffer for this. She would make them all suffer. Raymond, crushed and broken, his spirit utterly shattered, stumbled forward. He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, then on his wife's, a gesture heavy with defeat. Together, the disgraced Stone Creek family left the hall, the eyes of every Alpha and Luna drilling holes into their backs, a silent parade of shame and ruin. The sound of the massive oak door slamming shut echoed like a coffin lid, sealing their ignominious departure. And though Stone Creek was gone from the council, their alliance severed, no one doubted that Ash's venom, though temporarily suppressed, was not finished yet. It had merely found a new target, a new purpose, festering in the dark. The morning after exile dawned bright and crystalline. The recent tempest and the furious, bloody cleansing of justice, having washed the skies clear. The Wolf Lodge, though still bearing the deep gouges and scars of recent fury upon its ancient walls, pulsed now with a deep, steady rhythm, the beat of unified purpose. Brady stood at the head of the long oak council table, his posture radiating a quiet, unshakable authority that had been forged in crisis. Beside him, Oakley was the mirror of his strength. Their son, Landon, sat nestled securely in his mother's lap, a small sentinel of the future. Landon's laughter, high, clear, and utterly fearless, read through the chamber like birdsong after a brutal rain, a healing note that dissolved the last lingering vestiges of fear and tension. The boy clutched his beloved battered stuffed wolf, Coda, close to his chest. His gaze, inherited from his father, storm-grey eyes set into a child's round face, met the assembled alphas and lunas with an unflinching, inherited courage. The pack gathered tighter around their leaders. Enforcers squared their shoulders, their pride restored. The lunas of the Alliance smiled at Oakley with palpable respect, a profound acknowledgement of the fierce, precise strength she had wielded to protect her family and, by extension, all their families. Brady reached down, his fingers seeking and finding hers under the shade of the table. Their hands met, not in a tentative brush, but a grounding clasp, a silent, powerful affirmation. Their bond, which had weathered betrayal and threatened destruction, now only gleamed sharper and more resilient for the fire it had survived. Ash's name, attached to the near tragedy of an heir, lingered in the hall like a corrosive stain, but it had been drained of power. Now, it was a cautionary tale, a social warning. Ash of Stone Creek was spoken of in low, severe whispers. Her arrogance remembered only as the fatal flaw that had exposed a weakness in the entire Alliance's structure. Parents would catch their young looking too long at a coveted item or speaking too sharply to an elder and snap the warning. Do not be like Ash. Do not mistake pride for power or your bloodline for your worth. But the council knew they could not simply patch their wounds with silence and personal warnings. The alphas gathered, their voices steady and measured, recognizing the urgent need for systemic change. Brady spoke first, his tone flat and unyielding. We cannot allow the heirs and Luna in waiting to run unchecked again. One child, our heir, nearly lost his life to unchecked entitlement. One spoiled girl nearly shattered the foundational bonds of our entire alliance. Elise of Red Hollow added the necessary emphasis. It is not only the duty of a father, mother, or alpha to discipline. If any ruling parent fails in this vital duty, the council must have teeth capable of correction before the rot sets in. It's the way of the pack for thousands of years. Oakley rose, and the hall quieted as if compelled by instinct. Her presence alone demanded attention, but it was the clarity in her eyes that held it. When she spoke, her voice was calm, yet every word carried the weight of what had nearly been lost. Let it be law, formal, binding, and absolute. From this day forward, every heir, every Luna in waiting, every child of this alliance stands under the authority of the council. Any alpha, any Luna, any ranking enforcer may step in when discipline is required. This authority does not stop at pack borders, nor does it bow to bloodline. No child will be shielded by indulgence, not when the safety of all is at stake. Her gaze swept the hall, sharp and deliberate. Parents, hear this well. If your child is chastised for just cause, if they have been warned and still refuse correction, you will not coddle them. To do so, is to fail them. Boundaries and hierarchy are not punishments, they are protections. They are the bones of the pack. Strip them away, and you breed weakness. We will not see weakness undo us again. Brady's eyes rested on her, fierce admiration cutting through the storm inside him. Pride swelled in his chest. This was why Oakley was his Luna. She did not simply soothe the fire, she directed it, shaping it into law that would outlive them both. Oakley's voice rose, resolute. We are not only mothers and fathers. We are alphas, lunas, leaders. Our task is not to spare our young from discipline, but to forge them strong enough to carry the future with honor. A deliberate sound spread through the chamber. Low growls of assent, chairs creaking as alphas leaned forward in grim approval. The lunas lifted their hands in immediate unity, their approval unflinching. Then Brady spoke, his voice deep and resonant, sealing the decree. Let this be our shield, and our enduring reminder. We protect our heirs not through indulgence, but through discipline. We protect our packs not through silence, but through unity. This is the way forward. This is survival. Scribes hurried to record the decree, the scratch of quills loud in the silence. Alphas stepped forward to mark their names, the ink still gleaming wet as the council rose to its feet. Not merely an alliance, but something stronger, sharper, reborn from the shame of Stone Creek into a union that could not be fractured by arrogance again. At the literal heart of the chamber, the Wolf Lodge family stood together. Alpha, Luna, and Air. A unit of iron and fierce devotion. Brady bent down, leaning in to press a warm, possessive kiss into the soft skin of Oakley's temple. She smiled up at him, weary but fierce, her exhaustion tempered by the fierce triumph of justice, her hand resting protectively over the warm, small back of her son. Landon, sensing the shift in mood from formal severity to familial warmth, wrinkled his nose and declared with the blunt and joyous honesty of a child, Mama's the fiercest Luna, Daddy's the strongest Alpha, and I'm going to be just like them. The great hall broke into warm, relieved laughter, the final threads of tension dissolving into something whole, strong, and deeply felt. The sun was high now, pouring gold through the lodge windows. The council dispersed, heading toward the communal dining area. Brady and Oakley walked together, their shoulders brushing, their peace earned. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, carrying the heavy, sweet scent of newly cut pine from the nearby woods. A scent of permanence and home. Inside the hearth, fresh logs crackled with a triumphant, steady roar, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the Wolf Lodge family. Brady caught Oakley's eye and tilted his head toward the fire, pulling her close. They were safe. They were stronger. The alliance would endure, bound by the strength of their justice. And the future, carried securely in the small, steady hands of Landon, gleamed bright beneath the enduring light of the Wolf Lodge, underscored by the clear, unrestrained sound of his joyous, echoing laughter. That's the end of this tale. But in the world of the supernatural, there's always another shadow waiting. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, turn, and heartbeat. If you enjoyed the ride, there's more waiting for you. Take a look at the other audiobooks on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more magic, monsters, and stories that go bump in the night. Until next time, stay curious and brave, and never stop listening.